had to walk into buildings where there's protesters calling me an abomination and then I'm going to hell. Like,
Yeah.
So I have a high threshold for it.
Sure.
So, I'm not saying that it's going to be without negative comments. You're going to have a percentage of people in the world that we live in who comment negatively on what you're doing. But if you feel as a company, as a person that you want to speak out, then you have to be ready for that and be honest that it's going to come and if you're not ready and you're going to buckle and try to speak to that small percentage of people who disagree with you, like if you're going to try to convince them, then that's not your crowd, right? That's not your audience, right? And there's probably a much larger, I'm making it up, 70%, 60% who do agree with you on your stance, whatever that might be. And so I think we get so involved in worrying about those people who just are never going to be with you.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the None of Your Business podcast. Lacey and Shawn here. Different studio, different look today. Same program. You're going to love it if you're watching on video. And just a little bit of a different look, different microphone. So if you're an audiophile, lighting, you're probably like, hey, what's up with the sound? But it's the same great content. And actually, I'm pumped for today's episode because this is kind of stuff that I love to talk about. I love like talking about how we handle crisis. I love talking about how we handle chaos. I love talking about opportunities that emerge as a result of things that are going on. Oftentimes it's easy to focus on like, oh my gosh, the world is falling apart. And who hasn't been there? If you're in business, there's been a time when you're like, that's it. It's over. We're going to pack it up. We're done. But I got to tell you, inside those moments, always there's opportunity for advancement. There's opportunity for growth. And there's opportunity to take control of a narrative and tell your story, a story that could benefit tons of people. Today, our guest is Anthony Hayes of the Hayes Initiative, expert in all of those things. Anthony, welcome to the None of Your Business podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Let's just kick this right off because let me just tell you, because we did some brief beforehand, but one of the things that Lacey and I have learned, as I know for a fact that you know, is that you go on all these podcasts and you say all the same things because we say, where are you from? And we read your bio and we tell all of your extensive background. All of that is going to come out in our conversation. I want to jump right in and then I'll ask you why you are an expert in this. But like you were talking to us pre-show about opportunity and that, look, we're in a pandemic. We just had an election. Economy might not be where some people want it to be. All kinds of things are going on. It is super easy for somebody to really fall into this, things are just, falling apart. But you say that there's opportunity all around us. And I agree with you, but I also know that there's tons of people that are like, where, Anthony? Where's the opportunity?
Yes. Tell us about that philosophy.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the thing I always want to like make sure whenever I say that is I don't want to sound flip about it in the sense that I'm not saying it's not going to be hard work or I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult. But I think I like to try to approach everything as, look, this is happening right now, whether I like it or not. So the question is how can I respond to it or how can my business respond to it? And I think given that opportunity, you get to decide, do you want to engage with this chaos in some way? Or is this, is now maybe a time to sit it out, right? Like it's okay sometimes if you want to make the decision to pause something for the right sort of strategic timing to launch something. But I do think all too often you hear about people saying, God, I just wish I had started sooner. I just wish I had started that sooner. Whether that's the diet, whether that's the business, whether that's, you name the thing. And I think, that's why they say starting is always the hardest part. And so I think when you're in the middle of what we've experienced, and I think, we're certainly in the United States of America, feels very divided. Everything you read feels very frustrated. And regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on, I think it's just it would be very easy to just be frustrated all the time. And I think that, what I've noticed throughout the pandemic is that, the people that sort of, keep getting up, keep pressing on and keep trying to start have seen traction. It may not be exactly what they thought it would be, or, maybe they failed faster than they would have failed, but that means they can start the next thing. Starting doesn't mean you're going to succeed and it's going to become all the things you wanted, but it does mean that you're starting, and then you're going to get more input, and then you're going to either, shift things around, change things around, or again, sometimes failing fast, which is an overused analogy, is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I can't tell you how many people that we work with or that we coach that say, if I had only just done this 5 years ago, like where would I be now? And one of the things that we live by is done is better than perfect. I used to be a perfectionist.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to overcome that. And sometimes you just got to get out there and do, right? Just get out there and start. And so I love that philosophy. And so I got to ask, because what's coming up for me is, there's a lot of people out there that, maybe are having difficulty, navigating this particular crisis. And it is for some people, it can be paralyzing, it can be limiting. And they're wondering, Anthony, how can I listen to you? So I want to know, what is like the biggest crisis that you've navigated, maybe in your career and the work that you do? What did you learn from it that you could share for people as they're going through this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love that I had a panic attack when you said the biggest crisis I've managed.
I saw your eyes.
Like, I don't want to talk about it.
We're just going deep today.
Not happening. Podcast over. No, I think that the thing I've learned in crisis, in particular sustained crisis, right? Because that's what we're in. We're in a sustained long-term crisis. And that's particularly difficult because leaders like to lead with, confidence, right? And we're not really confident because it's a dynamic pandemic in the sense that the virus is doing what viruses do, and it's shifting and changing. And just when we thought, we were heading in one direction, it was Delta, then going back to school, and, some places have mask mandates, some don't, all these different things. So it's being, you're in a sustained crisis that is dynamic. And so as a leader, it's very hard to just come out and say, by this time we're doing that. And that's really complicated. And whether it's customers, people, constituents, if you're an elected official, however it is, people want to hear, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to solve the problem. And, sometimes I think what we've noticed through COVID, and I think probably a really big lesson for everybody is that, it's not always going to be a super clear picture. And for sort of perfectionist type A people, like we are, I think it probably is a good lesson and sort of take a breath. Let's see where we are tomorrow, and we can pick this back up. But the biggest lesson out of crisis is, you have to keep your head about you. There's going to be a ton of, and especially depending on the kind of crisis, early crisis that involves media. A lot of the early media stories are dead wrong. It takes a while for all the information to flow in, and it's hard to sort of hold your nerve while you're managing that or in that. But you do have to hold your nerve, and you really do have to sort of think about the end goal. And I think that crisis gives everybody an opportunity, again, to state their mission, state their vision. Who are they? It gives you a chance to share your values with whomever you're trying to serve. Again, whether that's, if you're an elected official, that's the people that you serve, or if you're, the CEO of a company, it's your customers. So it gives you a chance when you're in the middle of something to remind people why they were with you to begin with, even if you don't have the answer.
Right.
All right, I got it, Anthony. Anthony Hayes, the Hayes Initiative. Anthony's a very humble guy. He's a very humble guy. You had the question right there. So I'm going to take it a little bit deeper. So people call you when they are in crisis. I'm not talking about the hot water heater broke. I'm talking about we've got big problems. You're kind of like the wolf on what was that show where they called the wolf, the guy that comes to fix, right? It was a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yes, I've been called a fixer before.
The fixer.
Yes. Okay. So, and you're one, we can already tell, very humble. Two, you have this calm demeanor. So you get a phone call tonight and it's the next big thing that you're being called on to fix. Walk us through kind of what goes through your mind. Is your personality in this calmness intentional because of the things that you've lived through? I mean, and if you want to share some of the crises that you've helped other people navigate, again, it's not small potatoes. That's why I think like it's easy for me to think, oh my gosh, Lacey, we're having a crisis. And then I look at your resume and what you've navigated. I'm like, okay, we're not having any crisis. Everything is fine.
Yeah. We're having blessed chaos. Yes. That's what I call it. That's what I call it.
Take it, man.
So tell us what goes through your mind. You get the phone call tonight. It's the next thing. Kind of how do you approach this?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Listen, I have been, fortunate, unfortunate. I'm not sure which. Either way, it happened, and I'm really happy about it. And I do enjoy being in the midst of sort of like trying to fix a big problem that feels imminent and a ton of pressure. So whether that's working on a presidential campaign like Secretary Hillary Clinton's campaign, or, I managed media and communications for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which manages all the bridges, tunnels, airports, et cetera, in the New York area. It has a $7 billion a year budget, its own police force. They also are in charge of the World Trade Center site. Part of what I did while I was there was help them reintroduce the world to the World Trade Center after the 9/11 attacks. And so, when the call comes, I'm seeing people when they're at their most panicked and they're most fearful. And we certainly live in a world where, I think things that could be an innocent tweet can become a 2-day news story, depending on who you are. All of the sudden, your factory isn't working or there's some sort of crisis. So, and it has a habit of, because of how everyone has a phone in their hand, it happens so fast that everyone knows what you personally are experiencing or your business is experiencing. And so the main thing is trying to understand who the decision makers are. And if I'm actually talking to the decision maker, or I'm talking to somebody who is calling me because they know they need it, because they're two different things. Because you may have a communications team that thinks that you need to do something as a CEO, but you as a CEO disagree with your communications team. And so chances are, if I'm not being able to talk directly to the decision makers in the middle of a crisis, it's going to make it very difficult to understand what their priorities are. Like, how do they view this and what do they view as a success? And also understand if they're going to be willing to do what's required, right? And so some of this could be just as simple as, hey, we have found out that one of our investors, one of our board members has done X. It's not public yet. We're fairly certain it's going to become public. We want to make it public. We want to control it. We want to roll it out, and we want to do this. And so then you come up with a plan to figure that out. Those are challenging because you sometimes feel like you have time. Then you're nervous. Am I jumping too soon? Should we not have announced it?
Yeah.
What's the right cadence? And then there's the ones where it's just sort of full stream and you're in it, and there's cameras places, and you're going to need to have a press conference, and you have to get your ducks in a row very quickly. I think the thing I noticed most throughout COVID was how many people didn't have either a well thought out crisis management plan or even the slightest idea of what one would consist of. And I think whether you're a small company like us or, a major company with thousands of employees, you have to have it, and it needs to be a living, breathing thing that you sort of revisit once a year. Do you have all the numbers of the people who should get notified when? Do you have a chart where you can map out like Does it involve media? No. Then do this. Does it do this? No. Do that. Does it? Yes. Go over here. Right. It sort of gives you, because if you can create that when you're not in crisis, then you're going to be thinking clearly, and you're not going to necessarily just in the fog of crisis make mistakes, because there's going to be tons of mistakes that get made in a crisis.
I remember the call that I most got during the beginning of the pandemic was always, oh my gosh, I found out that so-and-so on my team in my office tested positive for COVID.
Yeah.
What do I do? Right? Like, the same thing. Should I tell people? Should I just remove them? Like, what? How do I navigate that? And you become
so reactionary when you don't have a plan in place. That's where mistakes can happen. So I love this concept. And I think what's really powerful about this is, like you said, this can be utilized for a very small company too. And I think we overlook those things because we're like, well, we just have a couple of employees, but it's just as important. And I love that. I know that you help people a lot with utilizing their voice. And, we take care of a lot of service providers and people that are in the service industry. They're very in touch with how things look and how it will make people feel when they use their voice. So in times of crisis, whether it's something like the pandemic or a crisis in your own community, how do you help people navigate like when to use their voice? How else do they decipher that besides having a plan? Because people get a little bit worried about, can I say anything in the first place?
Oh, sure. And listen, I sort of believe that when there's something going on and you feel compelled either as a company or as a person to sort of speak out or put your voice to it, I think what I sort of the immediate sort of tangible example I can give you is, even in early days of COVID, I'm talking March, April, New York City, everybody shutting down. One of the things that my team and I were thinking about is like, wait, we need to help. We need to, because everybody was wanting to help. Right. And so your point of like putting your voice to it, I was like, how do we do that? How do we reach out and do the things that we know how to do? And, I overheard myself talking to one of the clients where, they were saying, yeah, well, we're going to offer, testing, or I don't know, even all the things they were just saying, it was just sounded like all of a sudden they were becoming like a healthcare provider. And they were a sports team. And I'm literally like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Wait, pause.
Yeah. It's not that you can't help, and it's not that you can't use your platform to sort of spread information and do good things and help people, but like stay true to who you are. And again, going back to sort of like, how do you use the moment to share how you enter this space, whether it's as a person or as a business? And so for us, I was like, wait a minute, we do crisis communication. That's what we can offer pro bono help to like small businesses and restaurants in New York. And we know how to do that. We don't have to like overthink it. We don't need to create something that it's not. It's, a 30, 45-minute session. We can talk to them. We can give them tools. We can help with government relations as well. Like, how do we do what we do well in this big sort of global moment that's happening? And so I think that when you decide to use your voice, regardless of what kind of crisis you're talking about, I think you have to stick to what you do or who you are, and not try to sort of fit into, oh, I need to become a healthcare provider and I'm a sports team.
Right.
Well, I have two questions, but I'm going to do the first one. We'll see where we go on the second one. So in the midst of any of these crises, obviously we should have a plan, and communication is key. Tell us what, as far as communication is concerned, what not to do. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen people do where they've just, they've taken a bad situation and made it worse?
Ready. Ready. It is, everyone rushes and everyone wants to speak quickly. And it's a catch-22. I do want to like acknowledge, like sometimes it does feel like there's a ticking clock and you're like, we have got to get a statement out. We've got to get a statement out. We've got to get a statement out. And that's like a, the quintessential rock in a hard place. But, a lot of what we do is help people sort of hold their nerve. while we're gathering all the data, getting all the ducks in the row. If it's a bigger company, do we have the directors of each department? So we can everyone can fire off what they're doing to fix it or what they're not doing. The quick rush, because it makes you feel a little better, makes it feel like you're taking action, can sometimes come back to bite you. I've had people who were, at one point in the middle of a crisis, I have to be a little cautious on how much I share, but hey, I was about to say a little, probably more than I should have. Which is one of the things you have to pay attention to in a crisis. There was a really bad couple of news stories around a certain crisis that was very high profile in New York City. And, there was naturally a wonderful, funny New York Post reporter who went and did some digging around and saw something that wrote and even made it look even worse than it was. Right.
Right. Amplified it. Yay.
Yeah. And it was also, they were sort of fishing. It wasn't really great. It wasn't great on our part. It wasn't great on their part, but it wasn't at the end of the world. And so, everybody that was in charge was like, we are pushing back. We get our attorneys on, and I'm just like, this is a mistake. This story's happening whether we do it or not.
Right.
It's going to be on page 3 or 4. And if we do this, it will go to the front page of the New York Post. I promise you. And they're like, no. And so, we're sitting there and the call starts unraveling. Everyone's looking at me like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, there's nothing to do now. You poked the bear.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. And we're wrong. And we were wrong in the beginning and we're wrong now. So that's part of it's this rush to take action sometimes. And sometimes a no comment or sometimes not doing is a statement, and I think that's the thing where it really is a difficult thing. It is very unique. Everything needs to be taken. There's no one size fits all for how to respond or what to do. And I think that a lot of times people want it that way because it feels better, but it's just not.
I know you have another question, but what I hear you saying too is it's just like the fundamentals of communication in general, taking pause, right? They talk about that when you're in relationship with somebody else, when you're angry or emotional, or you feel like you need to say something or do something, just taking that moment of pause can actually be so powerful in how you're using your voice. And I love that because I hear you saying wait a minute, let's just take a minute. Let's find out what everybody's role is. What is everybody going to say? Let's have a clear plan. Let's just take a moment. And that could be the make or break for whether that goes over well or it doesn't. So that's a very powerful tip.
Oh yeah.
Anthony Hayes is his name. Clearly established now. He knows what he's talking about.
Yep.
He's been around. He's worked in some high pressure situations and helped to navigate some very high pressure situations. But here's the conversation that I think is critical to have today. LGBTQ, you make no bones about it. Very clear that your firm is owned and operated by LGBTQ community, yourself, your staff, everybody in the firm. This is super important because here's what happens. Whether it's LGBTQ or whatever your personal stance is, your position, a lot of times people have a position and they're afraid. They don't want to be canceled. They don't want to share because they're like, look,
they don't want to exclude. They don't want to be anything.
I'm a marketer. Why would I share this? Because if I share that, and so this is an interesting bend on kind of crisis management. It's almost like this self-made crisis between our ears.
Yeah.
Most of them are, yes.
Yes, that's true.
So tell us about that for you. Why take that stand? How has it worked? How have you communicated and navigated it? And how have you created that into an opportunity?
Yeah. So, I guess it's just sort of pretty simple, as a gay man in America, I've had to sort of navigate a whole host of things. And at 45, I have come of age when, we were still kicking people out of the military, people couldn't get married, people couldn't adopt, people couldn't go to hospital rooms. There's a whole host of things then, and even though with all of the visibility for the LGBTQ community, we still don't have full equality under the law. So my work as a professional got started really being an advocate for myself and my community, whether that was on the Hill in Washington or, in New York, where we worked on marriage equality. But it's just sort of who I am. And so I think that it does, having to communicate and, go and fight for your rights, you really do sort of learn how to communicate, not only with people who agree with you, but people who disagree with you. So, I had many meetings where, I was meeting with certain people who weren't really for marriage equality or didn't want to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or whatever it was. And they very much, made it very clear they didn't want to do it. And, those conversations were sometimes the most interesting and most challenging. And so it really, you sort of begin to articulate what you care about very well when you're having to do it in a very quick setting, and there's such a heavy consequence to it. And so, even some of the more friendly conversations where there are people who were for marriage equality or wanted to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or any of the things, they would always, those always felt a little trickier, just because they're like, oh, we support this, just not this year. And I'm like, well, so do you support it if it's not this year? Because then I can understand. So so I guess for me, it's just who I am. It's really where I learned to become, that's how I became a grown-up professional. It's how I got into communications and advocacy and government and communications. And so I think sort of it does provide a unique perspective. And I do think it has provided a unique tool to me, to my team, just because we have had to communicate in difficult ways, and you really do get very clear on what you believe and how you want to communicate it, and do it in a way for multiple audiences, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that folks should run away from what they believe. I think some people, I think there's certain people who believe certain things that just are wrong. Like we shouldn't be blatant racist, homophobes, misogynists, like all of those things, right? Like, so
maybe they should run from that.
Maybe they should run from that.
I'm not condoning that, but I think sort of the, I listen, I love, one example is I love beyond that we are finally seeming to prioritize mental health. I think that that's a really positive thing. However, on the other side of that, I also think that there's been a little bit of so much emphasis put on, well, I'm really feeling stressed. I'm really feeling stressed. And it's like, some stress is good. So like, how do we take this like great mental health moment that we're having and also sort of talk about like, some negative feelings aren't bad.
They're necessary.
And so how do you manage them without sort of like, I need to have 4 weeks off? And so like, that's where I just sort of struggle with like, but that's a hard, having those conversations are hard because, no one wants to be like, oh, so you can't handle your work and you need a day off. Like if somebody needs a day off, take the day off. But like, I think what I'm talking about is, when we're correcting so much inequity, things that we really haven't prioritized properly, the pendulum swings a little far. And so to me, I sort of feel like we've swung very far on certainly in this mental health place, where I think we're getting to a place where I don't want people, especially really young people entering the workforce, I don't want them to feel like stress or being overwhelmed at work you don't want to live in that. You don't want to have it be toxic. I'm not talking about putting up with a toxic work environment or any of that stuff. I'm not saying that is not what I'm saying. But I am saying some of the stress at work is just stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so then since we all know that, and as humans, we have to deal with that, how do we do that?
Right.
And how do we talk about it in a way that doesn't make people feel like ashamed of saying, yeah, I'm really stressed. Oh man, I am too. This project, it's killing me. And like, or whatever it is. But so to the point of like putting it out there, it is hard to put stuff out there, especially if, it feels a little contrary to what are some welcomed conversations. You know what I mean?
So what advice would you have for somebody who's inspired because you are able to put out there but then have that fear. Like, I mean, again, there has to be a right way and a wrong way. There's probably ways to not do it where it ends up not being true to your beliefs or not being true to yourself. So how, if somebody's like, yeah, regardless of what the positioning is, they want to share with the world that they hold this position. Any advice on how they can begin to put that out to their world?
Yeah, listen, that's certainly the billion trillion dollar question. It's you're not going to please everybody. And so I think the one thing I would sort of say is understand, like, it's okay if people disagree with you. And it doesn't mean that, obviously no one wants to go through sort of feeling over attacked or, whatever the word canceled, however we're phrasing, that is. And I think that fear of being able to speak up, regardless of what you believe, no one should really have it to that degree. I think that's a shame about where we are right now. There's no real, it just sort of is one of those things where you do your best to present it. I think my advice to everybody is to present it in a way that isn't about someone else. That's not about judging someone else. It's not about just sort of, and if you're genuinely confused about it, or you're like, gosh, but doesn't that mean, some stress is good at work? Are we really saying that no one should ever feel stressed out? Because if that's the case, then I am a mental case.
Right.
But I think I think that's my advice is, like, sometimes we get so into proving someone else wrong that we aren't articulating really what we believe, because we're just so about being the counterpoint. And I think it's an unfortunate part of just where we are in the communication world and media and everything. And it's tough, in the Twitter universe, everybody wants to,
yeah.
I would tell everybody to get off Twitter, but
well, that's what I was going to say too. Like, I mean, comments, like negative comments, like somebody gets a negative comment, for a lot of people, like, that really hurts them.
It is. They're very damaged by it. But that's part of putting yourself out there. And I think that's the hardest thing is, like, because what I keep hearing you say, whether you're a business and you have a stance, or you're an individual and you have a stance, like, you really have to be clear on what that is. And it has to be authentic to you in order for your voice to come across correctly. But then people go out there and they use their voice, and then they have a bad comment, and then they second guess themselves.
Oh yeah.
So it's like finding the strength first, I think, is so vitally important, right?
I've had to walk into buildings where there's protesters calling me an abomination, and then I'm going to hell. Like, so I have a high threshold for it.
Sure.
So, the comments that people make on I'm not saying that it's going to be without negative comments. You're going to have a percentage of people in the world that we live in who comment negatively on what you're doing. But if you feel as a company, as a person, that you want to speak out, then you have to be ready for that and be honest that it's going to come. And if you're not ready and you're going to buckle and try to speak to that small percentage of people who disagree with you, like, if you're going to try to convince them, then that's not your crowd, right? That's not your audience, right? And there's probably a much larger, I'm making it up, 70%, 60% who do agree with you on your stance, whatever that might be. And so I think we get so involved in worrying about those people who just are never going to be with you.
Yeah.
So is that a crisis? So do people call you and say, Anthony, I told people my position on XYZ, and then people commented negatively and I lost 2 clients. Is that a crisis?
Yeah. Well, yes and no, right? So there's a CEO, obviously, who will remain nameless, but would call me on like a Saturday at 6, 7 a.m. Hey, Twitter's blowing up. I'm like, what happened? What did everyone do? What happened? And he's like, I just, they can't, blah, blah, blah. They just keep, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I'm like, well, forward it to me. And it would get forwarded again on a weekend. And it would be a person with like 5 followers. And I'm just like, I don't know what to say to you. This is not you need
crisis
to get
averted.
Yeah. This is why, like, if you're going to obsessively look and like when you're not going to be able to have perspective, if you're not going to have perspective, that's bad.
Yeah.
Now losing a client that's a risk. It just is if you feel like you're going to speak out about something and a client comes back and just says, that's not, you have to realize that just if people, for whatever reason, I mean, you have to sort of wonder if you are putting something out and clients are departing, what are you putting out?
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I would say. And then the other thing is if you run a client-based business, Lord knows we do, why wouldn't you maybe give them a buzz?
Yeah. And see what happens.
So if you're in sort of like a retainer-based, project-based business where you have several clients and you feel like, man, I really want to speak out on this issue, but I don't want to damage my clients in any way, or have them feel or perceive to be damaged, you can call them and talk to them and say, hey, listen, as a company, my employees, myself, we want to put this out. Obviously, you hire us. We want to make sure that we're not somehow inadvertently causing you, our client, stress. You have to make a decision.
Yep. And frankly, sometimes if you put something out that you and your company stands behind and believes in, and you lose a client, maybe they weren't a right fit for you in the first place. We're not meant to serve everybody. Nope. And sometimes you go out there and you say what you believe, and you'll find 10 other clients that say, I want to work with you because of what you said. And so, you're right. It is a risk. And sometimes it just allows you to see kind of who you're really meant to serve as well. Who's the right fit.
And that's sort of how I feel about, being very upfront about LGBTQ owned and operated. If you don't like it, then don't come here.
Right.
And no harm, no foul. I mean, you don't have to hire me.
Right. Absolutely.
This is who we are. This is why we are who we are. And, then don't hire us.
Exactly.
So
I love it.
Last thing, tell me about prtipsfromapro.com. That's where you can find a little bit about this. Let me tell you why. And I love this, Anthony. I mean, I could just do it every week. We could have a conversation, because I think that this stuff, your knowledge base, is what everybody's looking for in a world where there's a lot of, quote, marketers, but we're talking here about controlling a conversation and representing ourselves as our true authentic selves through this controlled conversation that will basically filter out, like keep out the ones that shouldn't be there and allow in the ones that should. And man, I think that most people, they really want to get, more press. They want to get their message out. They want more public relations. They want all of the things,
and they need guidance on how to do it.
But they also think that, well, I'm not running for governor or president. Right. So tell me about prtipsfromapro.com.
Yeah. So basically, when we were going through COVID, we realized, again, how many people, to your point, wanted some advice that wasn't maybe necessarily sort of bringing on a 12-month retainer PR firm, whether that's to create a strategic communication plan or crisis, or, you're launching a new initiative and need government relations. So we sort of created and had the concept of, when you might need to go and have sort of a quick check-in with somebody about, like, hey, is this something where I should hire a firm versus not hire a firm? And really just sort of make ourselves available so that regardless of the size of company that you are, we can have sort of short consultations with people in a way that, we can create it in a cost-effective way so that people can get it. And then, they may also decide at some point, gosh, this really is a much bigger thing. And then they, that's when they sort of move over into the agency side, and we represent them however, depending on the project that they're looking for.
Super cool.
Yeah, that's
super cool.
And again, I know there's a lot of listeners out there that they're like, this is what I need. This is what I've been looking for, because we all experienced it over the last couple of years. Absolutely. Those moments where you're just like, how do I do this? What do I say? Where do I go? What if I had the right relationship with the right reporters? Maybe I could get my message out there. And so if this is something that you have been desiring or been thinking about, again, prtipsfromapro.com. I think they can follow you on Instagram. You have an Instagram account, PR Tips from a Pro, and Hayes Initiative also.
Yeah. Is that the firm?
Is that the firm?
Yeah, that's the firm. Yeah. So I would say the best place for anybody listening to the podcast to like reach out or look really is LinkedIn for me, Anthony Hayes on LinkedIn. I get tons of outreach from different folks at different times. LinkedIn is really the primary spot where I go. And where a lot of people, I've really found that certainly it's been shifting into this anyway, but certainly in the pandemic, I've really seen a change over the last 2 years in how people are using that platform. And it's been really beneficial for us to like touch base with people and for people to reach out. So that's always the best way to find me.
So LinkedIn, not Twitter. We got it. We're going to stay away from Twitter.
I've really stepped back. I love the platform. I love
LinkedIn it is. We got it.
It's wonderful.
That was great. So
yeah.
Oh, Anthony.
That was fantastic. I mean, I don't think we've ever said this on a podcast, but we definitely should do this again. You're a delight and joy to talk with. And
it was a lot of fun talking to you guys too.
I'd love to get you sometime if you're available, like in the middle of something that the world thinks is a crisis, and talk about like right when it's not one that you're busy, not one that you're managing, not one that you're managing. Tell us I'm on it, but like something that we're watching someone else do.
Anything Royals, I'm in. Like when Kate and Harry did the Oprah, I couldn't get enough of that.
That'd be
Andrew, like I'm in.
Perfect. Check. We got that. We'll write that down.
Next time, we're going to interrupt our regular scheduling program.
You're coming on.
Yes, I love it.
Because it's so good, because they should never, ever, ever be in front of a camera.
Right.
That's very
good. They should have like 46 U's too, like controlling the situation.
They do is the problem.
Wow.
I don't know if you guys saw, Charles did an interview about the environment, and it was unbelievable because he's like, well, my Aston Martin is charged by I'm just like, please stop talking. Please stop talking.
There should be somebody going shh.
Like somebody needs to have a seizure and end this meeting. Like it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I
gotta go watch it. I have to go watch it.
I will definitely send it to you guys because it was one of the most fascinating. I can't believe that someone thought it was a good idea.
This is great.
It was fabulous.
So if anybody wants to know what not to do, this is what you to watch. I love
Absolutely.
it. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, good.
Anthony, you absolutely crushed it. Thank you so much for being with us on the podcast. For everybody watching, make sure that you are subscribed on whatever platform that you are enjoying the podcast on. Leave us a review if that's an option. Tell your friends about us. We'll be back again next week with a brand new episode of the None of Your Business